Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. My name is Felix Jones or Lego Cheetah, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the film Mr. Holmes, starring Sir Ian McKellen as an elderly version of Sherlock Holmes who is becoming senile in his older age and is feeling a certain sense of desperation when confronted by his oncoming demise. And he's looking for, as he puts it, a sense of completion in his life, and he's trying to pursue his last case, which was a failure, which caused him to go into exile. And he's trying to basically remember everything that happened during this time, during this case, and just try and come to some kind of epiphany about what brought him to this place that he's found himself in, this situation. So to kick off this movie, when I first heard about it, usually I don't do this, but I went to check out who the director was, and I saw that the last two things he worked on were the last two Twilight movies, and that's not a good start, as if you've ever heard my opinions on those.
The entire film franchise is completely pointless!
But you can forget all about that when you come to see this, because this director has struck gold when it comes to moving on to a new project, because this is a really excellent piece. I gotta say from the off, if you're a Sherlock Holmes fan and you just love it for the mystery, if you're a murder mystery fan like my mother, she's a big fan of that. You know, Morse and Frost, a touch of Frost, and just all those things. She's a big and all the Agatha Christie's as well. If you're a big fan of that sort of thing, you know, the machinations and just trying to work out the mystery and the final big reveal at the end, this probably isn't necessarily the movie for you. But then again, I would say this is a movie for anybody. There is something in this movie for everyone, because I mean, did the main character in this movie necessarily need to be Sherlock Holmes? No, I don't think it did. But the character that they use does lean a lot towards Sherlock Holmes. I mean, they do the whole, because he took drugs and he's very emotionally detached. You know, he lives a very pragmatic, fact-based life. Sorry about that. And yeah, so it does actually work having him be Sherlock Holmes, because that character already has that, what's the word I'm looking for? It already has that medium down. And so it does lend a certain convenience to the writing. It gives them something to fall back on every now and then. Not that they need to in the slightest, because this movie is really just about an old man who is trying to... This movie is really just about an old man looking for some resolution, some answer to the last 30 years of his existence, and it doesn't really talk about a mystery. It's not about that. It's about the value of fact that and fiction, like that, because Sherlock Holmes exists entirely in this world of fact-based logic. He can't understand. He doesn't take into account emotional. He's not an emotionally insightful person, and this story is about him learning about the power of this logical fact that he exists, and the power of fiction, what that can have on a person. That, lying, and when maybe lying isn't necessarily a bad thing. When sometimes we need something, we need hope, we need something to give us we need this illusion in order to bring comfort to us sometimes, because sometimes things can't just be solved with fact. They need to be solved with this emotional safe place that fiction can become. It's indulging in a delusion to an extent, but we do it because it makes life a bit more tolerable sometimes, and sometimes it can help us. It can give us a temporary comfort zone whilst we move towards overcoming some emotional boundaries. If say,
Because sometimes truth isn't good enough.
And so sometimes I might be going through an emotional struggle because of something, and so we might create a fictionalized, idealized version of how this situation could turn out, and we place some hope in that for the time being until we can come to grips with what's actually going on. And that it can be unhealthy if it's taken too far, but really sometimes it can be necessary. It can keep people from being pushed over the brink. And I don't want to spoil any of the plot here. This is just these just the thought-provoking the sort of thoughts that this movie provokes in me, because it there, as I say, it's about learning the value of this fact pragmatic world that Sherlock exists in, and then the world of fiction and the bridge in between, which is the emotional insight. The emotion is what pulls these two things together, because what Sherlock doesn't take into account is how people feel and what he can do to what he can potentially be by being the person to comfort, to be there for somebody in an emotional sense, as opposed to just a mystery solving machine. And yeah, this movie, like I say, I don't think it's not really a Sherlock Holmes movie. There are like touches of mystery in here, and I don't want to spoil anything. It's kind of a hard movie to spoil, because the same message is repeated throughout the movie, but it never feels layered on. And when it finally comes to its conclusion, it does wrap everything up very well. And it doesn't feel like you can spoil this movie as such, because it's all, as I say, it's all just the same message, just building up. There is kind of a moment of epiphany at the end, but you know what it's going to be, and you know it's coming, but it's still just so wonderful to watch. And these characters, the performances in this movie are fantastic, and God, it is a very heartwarming movie, and it really makes you think about the power of fiction, the power as you know, if you're working as a creative like me, makes you think about what kind of power that fiction can have, and yeah, it's a I suppose this movie in itself is kind of a meta example of the kind of fiction that provokes the actually no, maybe I should scrap that thought before I get lost down a rabbit hole. I was going to say, like, this movie in itself is a form of fiction which could bring comfort to somebody, or it can teach somebody to become a better person emotionally, because that's what the power the fiction can have over a person. It's a big old, it's a great power. It's a great force that to be reckoned with, and I might just cut a bit out here, because I'm kind of getting a bit lost. But all in all, this movie is very heartwarming, and it teaches you something about about emotional insight. And I personally, I'm not amazing with emotional insight, and I often don't know how to properly handle a situation, and that's that's the constant joke in Sherlock and a lot of forms of Sherlock Holmes. It's that he doesn't get how other people feel, and therefore he says inappropriate things. But this film is about how that can actually have serious consequences, and maybe why that's not something to just be laughed at. Maybe it's something that people need to overcome, and that there is a real value to being able to understand other people and being able to communicate on that level. Because if not, then you will detach yourself. One of the things about Sherlock Holmes that kind of puzzled me when I was younger was because I've always been, like I say, I'm a bit detached myself, and and when I was very young, I didn't have a huge amount of friends, and it didn't bother me, because I would just be, oh yeah, I don't need friends. I'm studying and I'm learning, and so what the hell would be the point? I've got better things to be doing with my time than have friends. But I would look at Sherlock Holmes and think, how does he exist? Because sometimes I'd get lonely, and I'd be like, how does he exist in this world where he's constantly satisfied with living this life, where he's entirely alone? And this movie's about treating this character with somewhat more realistic tone, and the fact that he would get lonely and he would need friends, and eventually he would need to become attached to somebody. And I know he has Watson and everything in the stories, but still, in this movie, it sort of presents their relationship of being more professional than necessarily friendly, and they probably grew apart in the later years of their lives. It does deal with Sherlock in a very realistic light, and it's quite something that this movie has caused me to talk about my own personal life to this extent, because because that's the kind of, like I say, it's the kind of effect this film can have. It's a very strong piece, and it's very it's very emotional. It's a very strong emotional piece, and I strongly recommend anybody go see this movie. It's relatively short, and I don't suppose it's going to change anybody's lives, but it does really open up these big questions, and for that it is worth seeing. And the plot's fairly enjoyable, and everybody does, like I say, everyone does a good job in their performances. So yeah, I would really recommend this film. And yeah, oh, but like I say, if don't go in there thinking that it's going to be a sleuth story, and you're going to be constantly following this one mystery, because you're not. There are a couple of minor mysteries, but they don't even really follow the same formula that most Sherlock stories do. So instead, should don't go to it expecting that, but go to it expecting something not even Sherlock Holmes related necessarily. I mean, there are like little tidbits of Sherlock Holmes. They're more like fan service, really, because they'll mention things like Baker Street and the fact that he did a lot of drugs, and they mention the Hound of the Baskervilles at one point, and they do a couple of jokes about him smoking the pipe and the deer stalker and all that. But really, they don't bear that much consequence on the rest of the plot. They're kind of like comedy relief, except for not particularly funny. Either way, you're still going here? Yeah, sorry for a minute there, I thought my camera bailed on me. But so yeah, like I say, really recommend this movie. Go see it. You can see the effect it had on me, opening up about these things. And so yes, I hope you enjoy it, and I'm out. Alright, Phoenix Gents, see you later.